How could a Trump presidency impact the overall picture in Ukraine? To what extent is that a potential headwind for Ukraine in really getting the support it needs moving forward in this effort?
Well, for sure, that's what Kyiv is anxious about. Other allies are anxious too because they don't want to be left alone dealing with Ukraine and Putin. Should Trump make a decision to disengage a bit from NATO? We hope that's not what he does, but this would definitely have an impact, particularly if Trump makes a separate deal with Putin. And Putin says to Trump, look, I don't want NATO on my borders. I want you to get U.S. forces out of Europe, or I want to see the U.S. not do as much for Ukraine. If that's what Putin's asking for and Trump is willing to give it to them, that's where there's the problem, I think, is that relationship between those two more than anything else and how that might play out.
Jim, I know you're very experienced in working with European and NATO policy, and in your tenure, you've also specifically worked on the challenge of Russia in Europe. I'm curious just your thinking as the war has continued, if you've been surprised by the length of it, and also if you were in a position to advise whoever ends up in the White House come November 5th, what would you tell them to do in an effort to bring this war to an end?
Well, that is the great question, and you're absolutely right on all of what you've said. There were a lot of surprises. There was a lot of underestimation of Ukraine, overestimation of the Russians, and also surprise about how warfare in this day and age burns through so much ammunition and so many end items. So I think we have been finding ourselves not making the right decisions all the time in terms of the kinds of support that we need to give Ukraine. The bottom line is that right now it's almost at a stalemate. There was a time when the Russians just a few weeks ago looked like they were quite on the march, but Ukraine has held them back. Things have frozen on the battlefield now, and so I think the administration, whoever comes in November, is going to have to deal with this problem, which is if you want Ukraine to win, you're going to have to give them a lot more equipment and more sophisticated equipment than we have given them in the past. If you're afraid of upsetting the Russians, if you're afraid of escalation, then Ukraine will probably not win back that land that was taken from them by the Russians. So there's some fundamental decisions that have to be made by this new administration coming in. Either you're going to give them what it takes to win in terms of Ukraine, taking back their assistance, taking back the land that they lost to Russia, or they're going to have to cut a deal. And if a deal is cut, it means that Ukraine will probably lose that land that the Russians have taken. And that's what we're faced with. The new administration is faced with some pretty stark decisions coming up.
Jim, when you take a look at the tragic events that have played out, obviously over the last several months, but this week with the hospital attack from Russia in Ukraine on the pediatric cancer hospital, does that prove that even with this historic aid package that we're expected to be announced here at NATO for Ukraine, that Ukraine, in fact, does need more aid? And how much more, I guess? That's the question many foreign leaders are asking. But from your experience, how much more assistance do you think Ukraine needs ultimately if they do want to come out victorious?
Well, for sure, in terms of just needs today, air defense is just critical. We haven't given them enough. Whether it's Patriot systems from the United States or some European air defense systems. Obviously, your pictures show right now the destruction that comes when you don't have enough air defense. So that's a today problem. If we want them to win, we're going to have to help them deal with a manpower shortage that they have. There's not enough Ukrainians to really fill out the military to the degree they will need to have if they're going to push back on the Russians, who have more. They're going to need armor. They're going to need those F-16s that were promised with munitions and fuel and all that comes with having a modern Air Force. They're going to need drones and sophisticated ways to counter Russian drones. There's so much more, unfortunately, that Ukraine is going to need if they're going to take back the lands that they've lost. And we'll see if the allies are up to that. We'll see if the U.S. is up to that. And if we're not, then we're going to have to get used to the idea that the land that the Russians have taken might never be given. Ukraine may never get that back. And that's part of that fundamental question that's going to have to be decided by Ukraine, talking to its allies. And we hope that we agree that we're going to give Ukraine what they need, but it's going to be a lot and it's going to be expensive.